Earth from the cold void of space around 200 million years ago appeared as an entirely alien and completely unrecognizable world to our modern human eyes. Where the vast rolling waves of the modern Atlantic Ocean exist today, there was absolutely no water, only a relentless, continuous expanse of solid terrestrial land. Nearly all of the Earth's solid landmass was violently fused together by ancient tectonic forces into a gigantic, unbroken supercontinent known to science as legendary Pangea. This colossal supercontinent stands as one of the most magnificent, awe-inspiring, and terrifying geographic anomalies ever to exist in the entire 4 billion-year history of our planet. Spanning from pole to pole, Pangea was a massive fortress of rock, an impenetrable barrier dividing the world into two very distinct and terrifyingly extreme halves. Encircling this massive supercontinent was Panthalassa, the single largest and most expansive global superocean that has ever existed in the entire history of the Earth. It was an unfathomably massive body of water, covering more than half the globe, remaining almost entirely uninterrupted by any stray islands or smaller wandering continents. Because there were absolutely no landmasses to block its path, its powerful, unchecked ocean currents roamed freely, transporting intense heat and primal energy on a global scale. These massive supercurrents dictated the global weather, generating incredibly powerful hypercanes that battered the eastern coastlines of Pangea with relentless, devastating force all year round. From the high vantage point of orbit, Panthalassa appeared as a profound, deep blue abyss, a solitary and silent ocean guarding a solitary, completely unbroken world. This incredible geological configuration created a planetary environment of terrifying extremes, where life was constantly pushed to the absolute breaking point just to survive the day. There were absolutely no polar ice caps. The entire planet was locked in a massive hothouse climate, with global temperatures soaring far beyond modern historical records. This intense global heat engine fueled a volatile atmosphere where towering storm systems the size of modern continents regularly marched across the deep blue Panthalassa Ocean. Yet, despite the terrifying power of these ancient storms, they were completely incapable of penetrating deep into the vast, heavily armored interior of the Pangea supercontinent. This critical failure of the global weather system created one of the most hostile, unforgiving, and deadly terrestrial environments in the entire history of life on Earth. However, along the eastern margin of the great Pangea supercontinent, a completely different, much more vibrant and incredibly dynamic marine environment was beginning to beautifully thrive. This sprawling, sun-drenched body of water was the Tethys Sea, a massive tropical cradle of life that stretched luxuriously across the planet's vast equatorial region. Unlike the violent, unpredictable storms of Panthalassa, the Tethys was a calm, shallow, and incredibly warm marine sanctuary teeming with beautiful, ancient evolutionary potential. While many terrestrial ecosystems around the world were still struggling to recover from past extinctions, the warm, nutrient-rich waters of the Tethys Sea were rapidly exploding with life. Here, in these shallow tropical waters, many critically important groups of marine organisms began to rapidly expand, adapt, and patiently prepare to dominate the warming global oceans. Massive, highly complex prehistoric coral reefs began to stretch for thousands of miles along the coastline, creating a vibrant, bustling underwater metropolis for ancient marine species. These ancient reefs were heavily constructed by primitive sponges and early bivalves, forming a strong, durable foundation that supported an absolutely astonishing diversity of predatory life. Primitive ammonites with beautifully patterned spiral shells glided gracefully through the sunlit waters, their intricate tentacles actively searching the sandy bottom for small, unsuspecting marine prey. These intelligent, highly adaptable cephalopods became a crucial foundational element of the Tethys food web, supporting the rapid rise of much larger, far more terrifying marine predators. Early marine reptiles, resembling modern dolphins but possessing razor-sharp, terrifying conical teeth, began to actively patrol the vibrant edges of these massive prehistoric reef systems. Ammonites, ancient marine reptiles, and primitive reef-building organisms successfully transformed the Tethys into a biological engine, strongly driving the evolutionary future of the entire Mesozoic era. The shallow, sunlit waters allowed massive amounts of phytoplankton to aggressively photosynthesize, providing a massive, inexhaustible energy source that fueled the entire coastal marine ecosystem. This incredible abundance of marine food meant that the Tethys Sea was incredibly crowded, heavily contested, and violently competitive for any creature hoping to peacefully survive. It was a beautiful tropical paradise heavily masked by a brutal, unforgiving predatory hierarchy, where absolute speed, agility, and pure size dictated the rules of survival. Yet, this vibrant, water-rich environment was strictly confined to the coastal fringes, in absolute terrifying contrast to the nightmare that lay deep within the supercontinent's core. If you were to travel back to the solid ground of Pangea, journeying deep into the absolute heart of the supercontinent, the reality was brutally different. 200 million years ago, the central regions of Pangea lay thousands of miles away from the cooling, moisturizing, and life-giving oceanic influence of the surrounding seas. Modern paleoclimate models and geological evidence strongly suggest that these interior areas were terrifyingly hostile, constantly acting as a massive, inescapable oven for any wandering living creature. This hyper-arid prehistoric wasteland may have been far more extreme, significantly hotter, and profoundly drier than even the most unforgiving regions of the modern Sahara Desert today. Because the massive landmass blocked all oceanic moisture, rainfall in the deep interior was practically non-existent, leaving millions of square miles completely parched and violently baked. The sun beat down relentlessly from a cloudless, unforgiving sky, driving surface temperatures to absolutely lethal levels that would easily kill most modern mammals in mere minutes. Vast, endless prehistoric desert landscapes stretched endlessly to the horizon, dominated by towering sand dunes and deeply cracked, moisture-starved mud plains completely devoid of vibrant life. Epic, terrifying sandstorms swept violently across the Pangean desert, creating massive walls of red dust that blocked out the sky and suffocated anything caught in their path. Scorched daily by an unforgiving, blistering sun, it was a silent, deadly realm where only the toughest, most highly adapted ancient reptilian survivors could ever hope to endure. These ancient desert survivors evolved incredibly efficient internal kidneys to rigidly conserve water, ensuring that not a single precious drop of moisture was ever carelessly wasted. They developed thick, heavily armored, and impermeable scales to strictly prevent the scorching heat from boiling their internal fluids completely alive under the brutal midday sun. Many of these hardy, sprawling reptiles were forced to become entirely nocturnal, desperately burrowing deep into the baked earth to escape the lethal, soaring daytime temperatures. It was a bleak, unforgiving landscape of extreme scarcity, where the daily battle for survival was fought not just against predators, but against the very environment itself. This massive, dead heart of Pangea acted as an insurmountable geographical barrier, completely isolating populations of plants and animals, driving completely distinct, isolated evolutionary paths. The interior was a terrifying testament to the absolute extremes of geography, a place where the Earth's natural life-giving systems had completely and catastrophically failed. Meanwhile, the outer margins of the supercontinent told a completely different story, as the coastal regions eagerly and greedily drank the abundant moisture from the Panthalassa Ocean. Moving smoothly from the desert edge to the verdant coastal fringes, the striking environmental contrast revealed incredibly dense, vibrant, and highly competitive terrestrial prehistoric ecosystems. These humid, shadowy forests were heavily dominated by towering prehistoric conifers, massive ancient ginkgo trees, and highly resilient species of heavily armored seed ferns. It was a bizarre world completely devoid of the grasses or colorful blooming flowers we know today, existing entirely as an endless, monotonous sea of tough green vegetation. The air was incredibly thick with heavy humidity and morning mist, creating a lush, greenhouse-like atmosphere that fueled the rapid, aggressive growth of towering prehistoric canopies. Giant, intricately patterned fern fronds and tough cycad leaves covered the dark forest floor, their waxy surfaces glistening beautifully with heavy dewdrops in the morning light. Because flowering plants had not yet evolved, there were no fruits or vibrant blossoms, making the entire forest heavily dependent on wind for completely blind, chaotic pollination. The incredibly tough, fibrous leaves of these ancient plants were exceptionally difficult to properly digest, requiring specialized, heavy-duty biological machinery from any herbivore brave enough to eat them. This forced early plant-eating reptiles to evolve massive, incredibly complex digestive tracts, transforming them into slow, lumbering, barrel-chested giants that systematically stripped the coastal vegetation. In these humid, shadowy coastal forests, early bipedal dinosaurs and massive ancient archosaurs engaged in a daily, brutal war for survival, perfectly adapted to the rain and mud. They possessed revolutionary upright postures that allowed them to move with devastating speed and incredible agility, aggressively hunting smaller prey through the dense, unforgiving prehistoric undergrowth. The powerful, highly muscular hind legs of these early bipedal predators allowed them to sprint aggressively through muddy water, kicking up massive splashes as they chased their targets. This lush, green margin of Pangea was a crucible of terrestrial evolution, a highly competitive arena where the foundational biological rules of the Mesozoic era were being written. Yet, despite the overwhelming abundance of life, the deep geological foundations of this coastal paradise were violently shifting, silently preparing for an unprecedented, global-scale catastrophe. The peaceful, tranquil appearance of these ancient forests was nothing more than a magnificent, fragile illusion, hiding the incredible, destructive geological forces gathering deep within the planet. Beneath the thick, seemingly impenetrable crust of Pangea, a colossal geological time bomb had been quietly, relentlessly ticking for tens of millions of heavily pressurized ancient years. The Earth's deep mantle was incredibly restless, churning continuously with unimaginable thermal energy and colossal forces that were gathering immense, world-shattering tectonic pressure beneath the supercontinent. Massive mantle convection currents, swirling waves of superheated liquid rock glowing brightly with intense yellow and orange light, were slowly, inevitably pushing upward against the solid crust. Because Pangea was such a massive, unbroken blanket of solid rock, it actively trapped the immense heat radiating from the Earth's core, preventing it from safely escaping. This trapped, superheated energy caused the continental crust to slowly bulge, stretch, and warp, creating immense internal stresses that tore at the very fabric of the massive landmass. The first subtle, yet terrifying signs of profound geological change were quietly emerging, sending deep, violent tremors that loudly echoed through the ancient bedrock of the supercontinent. Rocky prehistoric landscapes began to violently shake, massive boulders falling from steep cliffs, as tiny ominous fissures slowly cracked open in the seemingly solid, impenetrable earth. These deep, rumbling vibrations were the ultimate, undeniable signal that this great, unified supercontinent of Pangea would not, and physically could not, last forever in its current form. Deep underground, massive magma chambers were aggressively swelling beneath the crust, the glowing hot veins of liquid fire beginning to violently pulse and expand through the dark rock. The fate of the entire world, and every single living creature currently upon it, was rapidly preparing to enter a completely new, incredibly violent and transformative geological chapter. From space, Pangea still appeared to be a single, enormous and immovable landmass, locked in an eternal, unbreakable embrace against the vast, dark global ocean of Panthalassa. But subtle, glowing red fault lines were beginning to faintly illuminate across the dark continent, painting a terrifying, undeniable picture of the catastrophic destruction that was rapidly approaching. The once invincible, solid foundations of Pangea were beginning to crack, fracture, and violently tear apart under the immense, unstoppable strain of the rising superheated mantle plume. For the highly adapted animals and plants currently thriving on Pangea, their stable, predictable world was about to become unimaginably hostile, wildly unpredictable, and dangerously, lethally unstable. This was merely the incredibly tense calm before the ultimate geological storm. The final quiet moments before the Earth unleashed the most devastating, prolonged series of eruptions in history. To truly understand the terrifying scale of what happened next, we must look at the modern East African rift system currently splitting the African continent today. Just like in modern Africa, The rising mantle plume beneath Pangea began to physically tear the solid continental crust apart from the inside out. As the crust stretched incredibly thin, it created massive, deep tectonic rift valleys that aggressively splintered across the entire central region of the supercontinent. These deep, jagged wounds in the Earth's surface began to release highly pressurized, toxic volcanic gases, slowly and silently poisoning the pristine atmosphere. The tectonic stress was absolutely unimaginable. Millions of square miles of solid rock were slowly groaning, warping, and fracturing under the unrelenting subterranean pressure. Massive earthquakes violently rocked the Pangean landscape daily, causing towering cliffs to collapse and creating deep, seemingly bottomless fissures in the once stable ground. These violent tremors were not isolated incidents, but rather a continuous, terrifying drumroll signaling the impending explosive death of the greatest continent in history. From these deep, glowing tectonic fissures, the first terrifying signs of liquid fire began to rapidly bubble and aggressively push their way to the surface. This was not a single isolated mountain volcano quietly erupting. This was a massive, continental-scale hemorrhage, where the Earth's crust literally ripped wide open. The ground literally unzipped itself along thousands of miles of fault lines, creating a continuous, unstoppable curtain of bright orange fire rocketing into the dark sky. The cataclysmic, world-ending event that was about to unfold is known to modern geologists as the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, or simply the Camp Eruptions. It remains, without question, one of the single most devastating, prolonged, and biologically destructive series of volcanic eruptions in the entire history of our planet. Glowing red volcanic zones expanded rapidly and violently across the central region of Pangea, completely annihilating ancient ecosystems exactly where the modern Atlantic will eventually form. For hundreds of thousands of terrifying, unbroken years, an unbelievable biblical flood of superheated molten rock poured relentlessly across the dying, burning landscape. The sheer volume of erupting magma was so unbelievably massive that it defied human comprehension, covering entire prehistoric countries in a thick sea of fire. A massive, unstoppable, fast-moving river of bright orange lava consumed dense prehistoric forests, ancient trees bursting instantly into flames upon contact with the intense heat. There was absolutely nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. The fires spread with terrifying, unnatural speed, heavily fueled by the highly oxygenated Triassic atmosphere. More than 10 million square kilometers of the massive supercontinent were eventually buried completely beneath a thick, suffocating layer of solid, dark basaltic rock. This incredible volume of volcanic rock was enough to pave the entire modern United States under a solid layer of stone hundreds of feet thick. Looking straight up from the burning ground, massive volcanic plumes exploded violently into the stratosphere, heavily charged with static electricity and continuous, terrifying lightning. These towering, electrified ash clouds completely blocked out the sun, plunging the once vibrant prehistoric world into a deep, freezing, and terrifyingly unnatural, prolonged darkness. The immediate physical destruction caused by the lava was catastrophic, but it was merely a localized, surface-level threat compared to the invisible killer being released. As the oceans of magma continuously breached the surface, they released absolutely unimaginable, world-altering quantities of invisible, highly toxic greenhouse gases directly into the air. Multiple massive volcanic vents spewed thick, heavy black smoke and glowing red embers aggressively into a rapidly darkening, heavily polluted, and violently suffocating sky. The atmosphere became incredibly choked with billions of tons of carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and highly toxic heavy metals blasted directly from the Earth's deep mantle. The initial injection of sulfur heavily reflected the sun's rays, plunging the Earth into a rapid, brutal, and incredibly deadly period of sudden volcanic winter. Temperatures plummeted violently across the globe, bringing terrifying, freezing conditions to terrestrial ecosystems that had never before experienced cold in their entire evolutionary history. Ancient ferns withered, and massive, cold-blooded Triassic reptiles quickly froze to death in the terrifying, unnatural darkness that had violently swallowed their warm, tropical home. But this initial, freezing volcanic winter was merely a cruel, temporary trick. The real long-term catastrophe was quietly gathering devastating strength in the upper atmosphere. Once the sulfur aerosols finally settled, the immense terrifying blanket of carbon dioxide violently took over, trapping the sun's heat with devastating, unprecedented efficiency. Global temperatures violently and rapidly spiked by 3 to 4 degrees Celsius, triggering a catastrophic runaway greenhouse effect that aggressively boiled the planet alive. The sudden extreme global warming turned the once stable climate into a chaotic nightmare, triggering catastrophic droughts and unpredictable, devastating weather systems worldwide. Completely dried up riverbeds and deeply cracked mud stretched endlessly to the horizon, heavily littered with the bleached white bones of giant, once dominant prehistoric amphibians. The intense, suffocating heat heavily dominated the landscape, aggressively baking the soil until it was as hard as concrete, completely preventing any new plant growth. A prehistoric landscape shimmering violently under intense heat distortion, a harsh, impossibly bright sun beating down through a hazy, toxic brownish sky. For the massive, sprawling reptiles of the Triassic, this rapid, terrifying climate shift was an absolute biological death sentence from which they could not escape. They required massive amounts of food and water to sustain their heavily armored bodies, resources that had now been violently eradicated by the intense heat. Desperate, starving predators violently turned on each other in the barren, ash-covered wastelands, fighting brutal, bloody battles over the last remaining, incredibly scarce scraps of meat. But it wasn't just the extreme heat that was killing them. The very air they desperately breathed had become a highly toxic, violently acidic poison. The massive concentrations of sulfur dioxide aggressively mixed with atmospheric moisture, heavily producing continuous, devastating torrents of highly concentrated, lethal acid rain. This relentless, acidic downpour aggressively burned the leaves off surviving ancient trees, heavily poisoned freshwater lakes, and completely destroyed the fragile foundations of terrestrial food webs. Heavy, toxic fog rolled ominously through the dead, charred forests, silently suffocating anything that had miraculously managed to survive the initial fires and the brutal droughts. The terrestrial world had become a literal, inescapable hell, a perfectly designed biological execution chamber that mercilessly eradicated the dominant rulers of the entire Triassic period. Meanwhile, the vast Panthalassa Ocean and the vibrant Tethys Sea were absorbing massive, unprecedented amounts of the toxic volcanic fallout from the rapidly darkening atmosphere. The oceans, previously teeming with beautiful ancient life, were violently transforming into stagnant, highly acidic, and completely unlivable dead zones of unimaginable, tragic biological scale. This rapid, massive influx of carbon dioxide heavily triggered a terrifying, deadly acidification of the world's ancient waters, rapidly dissolving the intricate shells of marine organisms. A once vibrant prehistoric coral reef in the Tethys slowly dying, beautiful corals turning stark white, cloudy acidic water, numerous dead ancient fish floating towards the gloomy surface. The primitive reef-building sponges and beautiful, intricate ammonites died by the billions, their dissolving shells blanketing the dark, silent ocean floor in a thick layer of white snow. Without the foundational reefs and the massive swarms of ammonites, the entire, incredibly complex marine food web suffered a catastrophic, rapid, and total systemic collapse. Massive, terrifying marine reptiles, the apex predators of the Triassic oceans, quickly starved to death in the murky, heavily polluted, and rapidly warming acidic seas. Global ocean currents aggressively slowed down, completely depriving the deep waters of vital oxygen, creating massive dark anoxic zones where absolutely no life could ever survive. The oceans essentially suffocated, turning into highly toxic, purple-hued bacterial soups that released incredibly deadly hydrogen sulfide gas back into the already poisoned atmosphere. This deadly, inescapable combination of extreme heat, highly toxic air, and aggressively poisoned oceans culminated in the devastating, world-ending Triassic-Jurassic mass extinction event. In the blink of geological time, over half of all living species on Earth were completely, mercilessly wiped out and permanently erased from the fossil record forever. A dark, burning forest, heavy grey ash falling like snow, and a massive prehistoric reptile collapsing exhausted and dying on the barren ground. Heartbreaking end of an era. Entire, incredibly successful lineages of ancient, sprawling reptiles that had heavily dominated the entire Triassic period for millions of years were suddenly, permanently gone forever. The massive, heavily armored archosaurs, the terrifying phytosaurs, and the lumbering dicynodonts were completely, systematically annihilated by the terrifying, unstoppable fury of the Earth. The once thriving, vibrant terrestrial ecosystems collapsed entirely, leaving behind a scarred, completely silent, and desolate landscape blanketed heavily in a thick layer of suffocating volcanic ash. A desolate, ash-covered wasteland absolutely devoid of movement, the sky a dark, bruised purple, conveying total absolute silence and total uncompromising death, total annihilation. The Earth had been violently reset, deeply traumatized and completely purged of its previous dominant biological rulers, leaving behind an incredibly eerie, terrifying planetary silence. As the massive camp eruptions finally began to slowly subside after hundreds of thousands of years, the Earth was left forever altered, physically scarred, and biologically empty. An endless, completely desolate landscape of hardened black basalt rock stretched to the horizon, still smoking and glowing dimly in deep, jagged cracks, absolutely devoid of life. These massive basalt formations are a permanent, undeniable physical record of a shattered world, a deep geological scar left behind by the violent, terrifying death of Pangea. Today, modern geologists find the exact same chemical signature of these ancient volcanic rocks scattered massively across the eastern coast of the Americas and Western Africa, showing modern towering rocky cliffs in the Americas and Africa, highlighting the identical dark basalt layers, connecting past to present seamlessly. Geological undeniable proof. A hand brushing dirt off a massive dark basalt column, revealing the ancient rough volcanic texture, highly detailed and tactile. Discovery and deep undeniable geological history. Embedded within these dark, hardened rocks lies the tragic, silent story of the Triassic-Jurassic mass extinction, a terrifying testament to the absolute power of the Earth. A fossilized skeleton of a massive Triassic archosaur half buried in volcanic ash, dry wind blowing the dust across the white bones. Highly detailed, dramatic cinematic lighting. The massive, dominant apex predators of the Triassic were completely swept away by the toxic fires, wiping the biological slate of the entire planet completely and utterly clean. However, in the brutal, unforgiving calculus of evolution and planetary history, massive death always creates unparalleled, unprecedented opportunity for the absolute strongest, most adaptable survivors. This massive extinction event left behind vast, empty ecological voids, desperately waiting to be boldly claimed by faster, stronger, and much more highly evolved, dynamic creatures. A tiny, incredibly vibrant green fern shoot miraculously pushing its way up through the dark, cracked volcanic ash, a powerful, undeniable symbol of incredibly resilient terrestrial life. An empty, vast prehistoric plain at dawn, the sun rising beautifully over the horizon, illuminating the empty landscape, a fresh, vibrant start for the deeply traumatized world. The fractured, shifting remnants of Pangea had quickly transformed into the ultimate, unforgiving evolutionary testing ground for the next great, unstoppable, and truly terrifying dynasty of life. The stage was completely, perfectly cleared for a new breed of biological machines, creatures forged in the fires of extinction, ready to violently conquer the new era. The single great landmass of Pangea was now officially broken. A deep, jagged, and continuously expanding chasm permanently separated the future continents of Africa and America. Into this burning, massive tectonic rift, the surrounding ocean waters finally began to rapidly pour, slowly filling the massive, terrifying void left by the torn crust. Massive, violent waterfalls of ocean water cascaded violently over jagged volcanic cliffs into the deep, steaming rift, creating massive, blinding clouds of thick white steam. The unstoppable ocean aggressively collided with the glowing, superheated magma at the bottom of the rift, triggering continuous, terrifying hydrothermal explosions that shook the very ground. This violent, unstoppable flooding of the continental rift valley marked the spectacular, catastrophic birth of what we now know as the modern, mighty Atlantic Ocean. Initially, this newly formed sea was incredibly narrow, shallow, and heavily restricted, essentially functioning as a massive, boiling cauldron of highly toxic, mineral-rich seawater. The intense, localized volcanic heat violently churned the shallow waters, creating a violently unstable, completely hostile marine environment that was utterly devastating to any surviving life. Yet, despite the cooling, stabilizing waters of the newly formed ocean, the global climate remained deeply coopted by the massive trapped quantities of toxic greenhouse gases. The powerful runaway greenhouse effect raged on completely unchecked, creating an intense, suffocating planetary atmosphere of extreme heat that heavily dominated the early Jurassic period. This was a completely alien Earth, a hostile hothouse world where the fundamental, biological rules of terrestrial survival and global dominance had been completely and forever rewritten. Global temperatures remained terrifyingly elevated, completely preventing the formation of any permanent polar ice caps, meaning the Earth's sea levels were exceptionally, dangerously high. The massive, dark Panthalassa ocean absorbed this intense, relentless solar radiation, acting as a colossal planetary-scale thermal battery that aggressively fueled violent, unpredictable global weather systems. Without the stabilizing presence of the massive extinct Triassic forests, the barren, exposed continental interiors were completely at the mercy of these terrifying new storm patterns. A dark, brooding sky filled with heavy, completely unnatural storm clouds, lightning flashing continuously, brilliantly reflecting on the turbulent, boiling ocean surface far below. The newly formed, incredibly volatile early Jurassic climate was about to violently unleash a terrifying global meteorological phenomenon known to modern science as the Mega-Monsoon. This incredibly powerful, planetary-scale weather system was driven entirely by the massive, terrifying temperature differences between the superheated interior landmass and the vast, slightly cooler ocean. During the intensely hot, brutally punishing summer months, the massive central desert of Pangea aggressively heated up, causing the hot air to violently and rapidly rise. This massive, violent updraft created a colossal area of extreme low atmospheric pressure, which aggressively sucked in billions of tons of heavily moisture-laden air from Panthalassa. As these massive, heavy oceanic clouds violently collided with the supercontinent, they unleashed rains of absolutely unimaginable biblical proportions across the barren, scorched landscape. For months on end, the sky violently tore open, pouring relentless, deafening sheets of torrential rain that aggressively pummeled the dry, completely defenseless Earth. The sheer volume of water was so incredibly massive that it triggered terrifying, catastrophic flash floods that violently carved deep, jagged canyons into the solid bedrock. Massive, roaring rivers of thick, brown mud violently swept across the plains, completely destroying everything in their path, tearing ancient trees directly from their deeply buried roots. Incredibly, these massive, seasonal torrents of rain temporarily transformed the deeply cracked, heavily scorched deserts of Pangea into vast, sprawling, and surprisingly vibrant inland wetland systems. Massive temporary lakes, some larger than modern terrestrial seas, rapidly formed in the deep central depressions, quickly becoming crucial, life-saving oases for any surviving desperate animals. The barren, heavily cracked earth miraculously exploded with rapid, aggressive bursts of green, as tough, resilient, deeply buried seeds finally sprouted after years of absolute dormancy. For a brief, fleeting moment, the interior of the supercontinent was a vibrant, bustling paradise, teeming with early bipedal dinosaurs and desperate, hungry prehistoric amphibians. These temporary, incredibly lush wetlands provided a critical, desperately needed window of opportunity for the surviving species to aggressively feed, violently mate, and rapidly reproduce. However, this incredibly beautiful, water-rich paradise was nothing more than a cruel, highly temporary illusion, a brief respite heavily dictated by the violent, unforgiving seasons. As the Earth slowly shifted its tilt, the brutal, life-giving monsoon winds began to violently reverse their direction, signaling the terrifying, deadly return of the dry season. The massive, heavy rain clouds aggressively retreated back to the vast ocean, taking with them the only reliable source of life-sustaining moisture on the entire continent. Without the continuous heavy rains, the brutal, unforgiving sun quickly and violently regained control over the landscape, relentlessly baking the Earth with absolutely lethal, terrifying intensity. The massive temporary inland lakes violently evaporated at a terrifying, unprecedented speed, leaving behind vast, deeply cracked mudflats heavily coated in toxic, blinding white salt. The once vibrant, lush green vegetation rapidly and violently withered, instantly turning brown and brittle before finally crumbling completely into fine, lifeless dust under the scorching heat. The vibrant, bustling wetland paradise was aggressively and mercilessly erased, violently replaced by a silent, deadly, and completely unforgiving landscape of extreme, absolute desolation. For the animals that had rapidly migrated to the center of the continent, the brutal dry season was an absolute, terrifying nightmare of mass starvation and dehydration. Desperate, heavily armored prehistoric amphibians, once completely dominant in the deep temporary lakes, violently burrowed deep into the rapidly hardening mud in a desperate attempt to survive. Many of these desperate ancient creatures were completely trapped as the thick mud violently dried into solid, impenetrable concrete, slowly entombing them alive in agonizing, terrifying heat. The massive, sprawling terrestrial reptiles of the past were far too inefficient, completely heavily dependent on stable, permanent water sources to survive this terrifying new reality. Their slow, incredibly sluggish metabolisms and incredibly heavy, sprawling postures made them completely incapable of rapidly migrating across the vast, heavily parched, completely unforgiving plains. As the dry season aggressively stretched on for grueling, terrifying months, massive numbers of these ancient, heavy creatures simply collapsed from absolute, total heat exhaustion. The landscape became heavily, tragically littered with the sun-bleached, massive white bones of the Triassic failures, a grim, terrifying testament to the brutal, unforgiving evolutionary filter. Only the most highly adaptable, the absolute fastest, and the most biomechanically brilliant creatures could hope to thrive and successfully conquer this incredibly harsh, bipolar environment. The newly formed, highly unstable rifts of Pangea had rapidly evolved into a vicious, terrifying testing ground that would forge the ultimate, undisputed dinosaur dynasty. In this extreme, highly volatile environment of extreme floods and extreme droughts, the fundamental, biological rules of absolute survival had been completely and forever rewritten. A completely new, incredibly dynamic, and highly specialized breed of predator was desperately needed to successfully navigate and violently conquer this chaotic, terrifyingly unpredictable early Jurassic world. From the absolute ashes of the greatest extinction the world had ever seen, a terrifyingly efficient, biomechanically brilliant new group of animals was quietly, rapidly gathering strength. They were uniquely, perfectly equipped to handle the extreme, terrifying volatility of the Mega-Monsoon climate, possessing evolutionary advantages that completely redefined terrestrial biological survival. Unlike the sprawling, incredibly slow reptiles of the past, these brilliantly evolved creatures possessed a revolutionary, highly advanced, completely upright bipedal posture. By positioning their incredibly powerful, highly muscular legs directly beneath their sleek bodies, they completely eliminated the exhausting, incredibly inefficient, side-to-side waddle of their ancient ancestors. This incredible biomechanical breakthrough completely unlocked unprecedented, terrifying levels of speed, unmatched agility, and practically limitless, aggressive terrestrial endurance. They could easily, effortlessly outrun the terrifying, massive flash floods of the wet season, and rapidly, successfully migrate thousands of miles during the grueling, deadly dry season. Furthermore, they possessed a devastatingly efficient, highly advanced bird-like respiratory system, completely utilizing a complex, deeply integrated network of biological air sacs. This highly specialized, incredible respiratory design allowed them to extract massive, critical amounts of oxygen with absolutely every single breath, efficiently fueling their highly active, aggressive metabolisms. It also acted as a highly effective, built-in biological cooling system, completely preventing them from dangerously overheating in the absolutely brutal, scorching early Jurassic sun. These biological masterpieces were, of course, the early dinosaurs, and the incredibly harsh, highly unstable conditions of Pangea had inadvertently forged them into absolute perfection. As the Triassic giants violently and tragically died out, they left behind incredibly massive, completely empty ecological niches, desperately waiting to be boldly claimed by these new biological machines. The early Jurassic world was essentially a vast, completely empty biological canvas, an incredibly rare, unprecedented evolutionary opportunity that the dinosaurs quickly and violently seized. Small, highly agile bipedal theropods rapidly, aggressively expanded their hunting territories, quickly transforming into the undisputed, absolute apex predators of the deeply traumatized terrestrial landscape. They hunted in highly coordinated, incredibly lethal packs, using their terrifying speed, sharp claws, and brilliant, highly adapted senses to completely dominate the remaining, struggling survivors. The stage was finally perfectly set for the rapid, completely unstoppable rise of the most magnificent and famous biological empire in the entire history of life on Earth. The age of dinosaurs had officially, undeniably begun, and their glorious, terrifying reign of massive giants would definitively shape the ultimate destiny of our planet for millions of years. But the aggressive, completely unstoppable biological revolution was not strictly confined to the dry, deeply cracked, sun-scorched Earth of the massive supercontinent. As the dinosaurs aggressively conquered the land, another equally terrifying, completely distinct group of highly specialized reptiles was silently, violently preparing to completely dominate the vast dark oceans. The Triassic-Jurassic mass extinction had violently, mercilessly purged the Tethys Sea and the great Panthalassa Ocean of their previous, incredibly dominant apex marine predators. The dark, silent marine void desperately begged to be filled, and nature quickly answered with a terrifying, entirely new breed of highly evolved, sleek, ocean-going monsters. These ancient land reptiles had made the incredible, highly daring evolutionary decision to completely abandon the heavily contested land and slowly, permanently return to the deep water. Over millions of years, their legs completely transformed into powerful, highly efficient flippers, and their bodies violently streamlined to perfectly cut through the dense, heavy water. They evolved to be completely, heavily dependent on the ocean, giving birth to live young directly in the water, severing their final, desperate biological ties to the land. The marine realm was about to witness the spectacular, terrifying rise of the ichthyosaurs and the long-necked plesiosaurs, the absolute undisputed rulers of the Mesozoic deep. As the early Jurassic period slowly, steadily progressed, the Earth rapidly stabilized, and the terrifying, highly extreme climatic volatility of the Mega-Monsoon began to slightly mellow. The deep, jagged rifts tearing Pangea apart continued to aggressively widen, slowly introducing critical cooling oceanic moisture deeper into the once dead, hopelessly barren continental interior. Vast, lush green coastal forests aggressively expanded their deeply rooted territories, completely replacing the massive, dead deserts with incredibly vibrant, towering canopies of ancient life. The world was slowly, beautifully healing, transforming from an apocalyptic, completely devastated burning wasteland into a lush, incredibly vibrant, and deeply competitive Jurassic paradise. Both on the deeply scarred land and in the newly formed, rapidly expanding deep oceans, the biological stage was perfectly, brilliantly set for the spectacular age of giants. The early Jurassic was absolutely not just an era of mere survival. It was the spectacular, highly explosive, and truly terrifying dawn of Earth's greatest, most legendary biological monsters. The early Jurassic landscape had been completely swept clean by the catastrophic extinction, leaving behind an incredibly vast, desperately empty, and completely undefended biological canvas. Into this massive, unparalleled ecological void stepped the dinosaurs, rapidly expanding their newly acquired territories and violently aggressively establishing themselves as the absolute apex predators. Without the massive, heavy-armored Triassic archosaurs to aggressively bully and suppress them, these highly advanced bipedal creatures experienced an incredibly explosive, completely unprecedented evolutionary radiation. The true secret to their terrifying, unmatched early Jurassic success was not just their upright posture, but their incredibly rapid, highly efficient, and aggressive growth rates. Early dinosaurs grew at a terrifying, astonishing pace, rapidly packing on massive amounts of highly muscular bulk in just a few short, highly competitive years. This incredible, highly advanced metabolism allowed them to quickly reach massive sizes that completely intimidated and physically overpowered any remaining, struggling primitive reptilian competitors. The deeply scarred, slowly healing terrestrial landscape was now rapidly, completely dominated by the continuous, terrifying sound of heavy, perfectly synchronized bipedal footsteps. Massive, highly coordinated packs of lethal theropod dinosaurs violently roamed the lush, expansive coastal forests, aggressively hunting anything that was unfortunate enough to cross their path. One of the absolute most iconic, terrifying, and brilliantly adapted apex predators of this early era was the magnificent, highly lethal dinosaur known as Dilophosaurus. Stretching an impressive 20 feet long and weighing nearly 1,000 pounds, it was the absolute, undisputed, and incredibly terrifying king of the early Jurassic. Dilophosaurus possessed an incredibly sleek, highly aerodynamic, muscular build, heavily equipped with powerful, devastatingly fast hind legs that allowed it to aggressively chase down swift prey. Its most striking, absolutely unforgettable feature was the pair of highly elaborate, beautifully ornate bony crests sitting proudly atop its massive, terrifyingly lethal reptilian skull. These incredibly fragile, highly vascularized crests were almost certainly not used as physical weapons, but rather as incredibly vibrant, brilliantly colored visual displays to aggressively intimidate rivals. Armed with a highly specialized, deeply notched upper jaw, Dilophosaurus was uniquely, perfectly adapted for violently aggressively ripping flesh and deeply tearing into tough, struggling prey. It was a truly magnificent, terrifyingly efficient biological killing machine, a perfect, brutal embodiment of the incredibly fast, highly lethal new evolutionary rules of the Jurassic. However, the terrifying theropods were absolutely not the only incredible dinosaurs aggressively experiencing a massive, unprecedented evolutionary boom in the lush, highly vibrant early Jurassic forests. A completely different, incredibly massive, and completely distinct lineage of dinosaurs was quietly, steadily beginning to violently conquer the deeply rich, heavy terrestrial plant life. These were the massive, incredibly heavy prosauropods, the direct, heavily built biological ancestors of the truly colossal, earth-shaking, long-necked giants that would perfectly define the later Jurassic. Among the very first and absolutely most successful of these incredibly massive early giants was the magnificent, towering dinosaur known to science as Plateosaurus. Plateosaurus was an incredibly heavy, robust, barrel-chested herbivore that could easily, comfortably rear up perfectly on its massive, incredibly powerful hind legs to reach high branches. Reaching lengths of over 26 feet and weighing up to 4 heavily muscled tons, it was the absolute largest land animal the Earth had ever seen. Its incredibly massive, highly complex digestive system was perfectly, brilliantly designed to aggressively process massive, unbelievable volumes of the incredibly tough, highly fibrous prehistoric ferns and cycads. Plateosaurus roamed the vast, incredibly lush European floodplains in massive, highly coordinated, thundering herds, completely transforming the entire physical structure of the prehistoric terrestrial landscape. By aggressively stripping massive amounts of heavy vegetation from the towering forest canopies, these massive giants actively, violently engineered the deeply dense environment around them. They created massive, expansive open clearings in the deeply dense forests, inadvertently providing crucial, highly desperately needed space for entirely new species of plants to rapidly thrive. The massive, earth-shaking footsteps of Plateosaurus herds physically compacted the heavy, wet soil, completely altering the complex, intricate drainage patterns of the sprawling Jurassic floodplains. They were the Earth's very first true, massive biological bulldozers, incredibly powerful, undeniable forces of nature that aggressively, beautifully sculpted the rapidly recovering prehistoric world. Yet, despite their incredible, intimidating massive size, even the towering Plateosaurus herds had to remain constantly vigilant against the highly aggressive, pack-hunting early Jurassic theropods. The deeply dense, highly shadowy coastal forests had completely transformed into a highly complex, incredibly dangerous, and brutally competitive battleground between massively armed giants and lightning-fast killers. But the brutal, completely uncompromising war for ultimate biological supremacy was not exclusively confined to the deep, massive terrestrial forests and the sun-baked inland plains. In the rapidly expanding, newly formed Atlantic Ocean and the vast, deeply stabilizing Tethys Sea, an equally terrifying, highly explosive evolutionary arms race was aggressively underway. The deeply traumatized, highly acidic marine ecosystems had finally miraculously recovered, and the massive, empty oceanic niches were once again rapidly, vibrantly teeming with incredibly complex life. At the absolute foundational base of this completely new, highly dynamic marine food web were the incredibly prolific, brilliantly adaptable, and beautifully complex ammonites. These highly intelligent, heavily tentacled cephalopods experienced an absolutely massive, completely unprecedented biological explosion, rapidly diversifying into thousands of brilliantly distinct, highly specialized shell shapes. Ammonites were absolutely, undeniably the ultimate perfect prey item, highly abundant, incredibly nutritious, and easily, aggressively hunted by absolutely everything that possessed sharp teeth. Their incredible, unbelievable abundance completely fueled the rapid, highly explosive rise of a completely new, truly terrifying generation of highly advanced, heavily streamlined marine reptiles. The absolute, undisputed, terrifying kings of the early Jurassic oceans were the incredible, highly evolved ichthyosaurs, marine reptiles that perfectly, beautifully resembled modern, fast-swimming dolphins. Unlike their early, heavily sprawling Triassic ancestors, these magnificent Jurassic ichthyosaurs had completely, beautifully mastered the complex, highly demanding physics of incredibly fast, deep ocean swimming. Their bodies had aggressively, violently streamlined into perfect, frictionless biological torpedoes, heavily equipped with powerful, highly muscular crescent-shaped tail flukes for absolute maximum, terrifying speed. One of the absolute largest, most terrifying and completely lethal of these ancient oceanic predators was the magnificent, deeply intimidating marine monster known as Temnodontosaurus. Reaching incredible, terrifying lengths of over 39 feet, Temnodontosaurus was a highly lethal, completely unstoppable apex predator, capable of violently hunting almost anything in the ocean. It possessed incredibly massive, highly powerful jaws heavily lined with thick, deeply rooted conical teeth perfectly, brilliantly designed for violently crushing heavy shells and ripping thick flesh. But its absolutely most terrifying, unforgettable physical feature was its incredibly massive, highly advanced eyes, which were the absolute largest of any known animal in Earth's history. Each deeply complex, heavily protected eye was nearly 10 inches across, completely allowing Temnodontosaurus to hunt with absolute, terrifying precision in the pitch-black oceanic depths. These massive, highly specialized visual organs were deeply supported by thick, strong bony rings, perfectly preventing them from violently collapsing under the immense, crushing deep-sea pressure. With its massive, deeply unsettling eyes, Temnodontosaurus aggressively, silently patrolled the dark, completely freezing oceanic abyss, violently ambushing massive squids and smaller, unsuspecting marine reptiles. It was the absolute, undeniable apex predator of the early Jurassic seas, a completely perfect, highly terrifying biological killing machine, heavily forged by the relentless pressures of evolution. However, the incredibly fast, highly streamlined ichthyosaurs were completely not alone in their aggressive, violent domination of the rapidly expanding, deeply vibrant Jurassic oceans. Another entirely distinct, highly bizarre, and truly incredible group of ancient marine reptiles was beginning to aggressively establish a powerful, undeniably dominant oceanic presence. These were the plesiosaurs, completely characterized by their incredibly long, highly flexible serpentine necks, massive, heavy barrel-shaped bodies, and 4 powerful, highly efficient swimming flippers. Unlike the incredibly fast, aggressively torpedo-like ichthyosaurs, the deeply bizarre plesiosaurs utilized a completely different, highly specialized, and incredibly unique method of deep ocean hunting. They essentially elegantly flew through the dense, heavy water, gracefully flapping their 4 massive, highly muscular flippers in a smooth, deeply synchronized, bird-like swimming motion. Their incredibly long, highly flexible necks allowed them to violently, rapidly strike at massive schools of fast-moving fish with terrifying, completely unavoidable, and deadly precision. This highly bizarre, completely unique physical body plan was incredibly, undeniably successful, completely allowing plesiosaurs to aggressively thrive in the world's oceans for over 100 million years. Together, the lightning-fast, highly terrifying ichthyosaurs and the incredibly bizarre, highly specialized plesiosaurs completely, totally ruled the deeply vibrant, highly competitive Mesozoic marine environment. They aggressively maintained a tight, violently uncompromising biological grip on the complex ocean food webs, completely preventing any other major predators from successfully rising to power. For tens of millions of heavily contested years, the vast deep oceans belonged entirely, unquestionably, and exclusively to these magnificent, highly terrifying, deeply adapted marine reptiles. Both on the deeply scarred land and in the dark, violently expanding oceans, the early Jurassic was defined entirely by the spectacular, unstoppable rise of these incredible giants. The Earth had completely, beautifully recovered from the apocalyptic, devastating fires of the camp eruptions, aggressively entering a spectacular, highly vibrant new golden age of biological dominance. However, entirely hidden in the deep, terrifying shadows of these massive, earth-shaking biological monsters, a completely different, highly secretive survival story was quietly, desperately unfolding. While the massive, towering dinosaurs aggressively conquered the sun-drenched plains, and the high, dense canopies, the dark, highly dangerous forest floor was heavily occupied by someone else. This deeply secretive, incredibly treacherous realm belonged entirely to a group of tiny, completely insignificant-looking creatures that were desperately fighting a daily, horrifying battle for survival. They were absolutely not massive, terrifying apex predators, and they completely lacked the thick, heavy bony armor or the terrifying, lightning-fast speed of the early Jurassic dinosaurs. Instead, these tiny, incredibly desperate creatures heavily relied on absolute, total invisibility, desperately hiding deep in the wet, rotting leaf litter to successfully avoid sudden, violent death. To the massive, deeply arrogant dinosaurs that thundered violently above them, these tiny, scurrying creatures were nothing more than an incredibly insignificant, completely irrelevant, minor biological nuisance. Yet, these tiny, deeply terrified, heavily hunted survivors harbored an incredibly profound, truly world-changing biological secret completely hidden deep within their small, highly complex genetic code. They were the cynodonts, a highly advanced, deeply specialized lineage of ancient therapsids that had miraculously barely survived the apocalyptic, world-ending Triassic-Jurassic mass extinction event. And among these tiny, deeply desperate, scrambling cynodonts were the absolute, unquestionable, and truly direct biological ancestors of every single mammal that currently exists on Earth today. To fully understand the incredible, highly terrifying evolutionary journey of our own deeply ancient mammalian ancestors, we must completely, critically examine the brutal, unforgiving reality of their existence. The age of dinosaurs was an absolute, completely inescapable, and truly terrifying nightmare for any creature that could not rapidly evolve to physically compete with the towering giants. Because the dinosaurs aggressively, violently monopolized all of the large and medium-sized ecological niches, the tiny early mammals were completely, forcefully banished into the deep, terrifying shadows. This brutal, highly uncompromising biological suppression forced them to aggressively adopt an incredibly strict, highly dangerous, and deeply specialized completely nocturnal lifestyle just to desperately survive. They were completely, absolutely terrified of the daylight because venturing out into the bright, sun-drenched Jurassic world meant certain, sudden, and incredibly violent death from swift predators. This intense, highly aggressive period of deep evolutionary suppression is known to modern evolutionary biologists as the terrifying, highly critical nocturnal bottleneck. It was a brutal, incredibly unforgiving biological filter that completely, undeniably shaped the highly complex, deeply intricate physiological blueprint of the entire global mammalian lineage forever. To beautifully illustrate this profound, highly critical period of mammalian evolution, we must carefully examine a truly remarkable, deeply ancient creature known to modern science as Morganucodon. Morganucodon was an incredibly tiny, perfectly specialized early mammal, barely reaching the physical size of a small modern mouse, completely dwarfed by the massive Jurassic environment. It possessed an incredibly fragile, highly delicate skeletal structure, completely, utterly defenseless against the massive, heavily armored, and aggressively predatory dinosaurs that heavily dominated the terrestrial world. Forced completely, violently into the dark, terrifying shadows, Morganucodon and its highly desperate mammalian relatives had to aggressively, rapidly reinvent their entire biological existence to simply survive. The absolute, most critical evolutionary adaptation was the aggressive, highly necessary development of endothermy, or what we commonly refer to as warm-bloodedness, to survive the freezing nights. Unlike the massive, sun-dependent reptiles, these tiny mammals could aggressively, efficiently generate their own internal body heat, completely allowing them to remain highly active in the cold darkness. To successfully trap and conserve this deeply precious internal heat, they rapidly evolved a highly specialized, incredibly dense layer of biological insulation that we now call fur. This incredible, highly defining physical trait completely, beautifully separated them from their scaly reptilian ancestors, permanently marking the brilliant, unstoppable dawn of a completely new biological era. But simply staying warm in the freezing, terrifying dark was absolutely not enough. They also had to successfully hunt for food while completely avoiding highly lethal nocturnal predators, because their physical vision was heavily, severely limited in the pitch-black Jurassic night. They aggressively, rapidly evolved incredibly powerful, highly sensitive alternative senses to perfectly navigate the shadows. Their ancient mammalian brains underwent a massive, completely unprecedented evolutionary expansion, aggressively dedicating immense neural processing power to the critical senses of smell and highly sensitive hearing. The tiny, delicate bones in their lower jaws slowly, beautifully migrated into their skulls, perfectly forming the highly complex, incredibly sensitive middle ear structure unique to all mammals. This incredible, highly advanced biological engineering allowed them to clearly hear the tiny, quiet rustling of insects and the terrifying heavy footsteps of approaching, lethal predators. They also developed highly sensitive, incredibly intricate whiskers on their small snouts, completely allowing them to physically feel their way through the dark, dense, and heavily cluttered undergrowth. For tens of millions of heavily suppressed, deeply terrifying years, our ancient mammalian ancestors lived this highly dangerous, completely marginalized existence directly beneath the massive feet of dinosaurs. This incredibly long, highly brutal period of deep evolutionary suppression completely, undeniably hardwired the fundamental biological blueprint of every single mammal that exists on the Earth today. It is the exact, undeniable reason why most modern terrestrial mammals possess highly acute hearing, incredibly strong senses of smell, and a heavily reliance on warm-blooded insulation. The violent, catastrophic breakup of the Pangea supercontinent had completely, deeply traumatized the entire planet, but it also brilliantly, perfectly set the stage for our eventual, incredible existence. If the Earth's deep mantle had not violently, aggressively surged upward 200 million years ago, the massive supercontinent might never have fractured into separate, distinct pieces. Without the creation of the massive Atlantic Ocean and the aggressive division of the landmasses, the global climate would have remained permanently, terrifyingly extreme and heavily bipolar. The massive, sprawling Triassic reptiles might have completely continued their slow, heavy biological dominance, aggressively preventing the fast, highly agile dinosaurs from ever rising to global power. And without the absolute, terrifying predatory pressure of the towering dinosaurs, our tiny mammalian ancestors would never have been violently forced into the deeply transformative, nocturnal bottleneck. They would never have desperately needed to aggressively evolve warm-bloodedness, thick insulating fur, or their highly complex, incredibly advanced sensory and neural processing biological systems. The catastrophic, world-ending Triassic-Jurassic mass extinction was absolutely not just a tragic, devastating end. It was an incredibly vital, highly necessary, and brilliantly creative evolutionary beginning. It violently, ruthlessly cleared the biological board, aggressively forcing life to completely adapt, rapidly innovate, and aggressively overcome the most terrifying, deadly environmental challenges imaginable. The early Jurassic was a completely alien, deeply terrifying world heavily defined by apocalyptic volcanic fire, extreme torrential floods, and the absolute unquestionable dominance of towering giants. Yet, hidden completely within the dark, heavily scarred bedrock of this deeply ancient era, lies the undeniable physical proof of life's incredible, absolutely unstoppable biological resilience. From the deeply cracked, heavily baked deserts of Pangea to the dark, violently acidic depths of the Panthalassa Ocean, life aggressively found a way to beautifully endure. The deeply separated continents slowly drifted apart, heavily carrying the deeply resilient biological descendants of those ancient survivors to every single remote corner of the modern globe. The exact same ancient, heavily stressed tectonic forces that violently, aggressively tore the supercontinent apart are still actively, quietly reshaping the surface of our planet to this day. The modern Atlantic Ocean continues to slowly, steadily widen by a few inches every single year, aggressively pushing the Americas further and further away from Europe and Africa. The towering, jagged volcanic cliffs of the camp eruptions still stand proudly, silently guarding the deeply ancient, heavily scarred coastlines of completely disparate, widely separated modern nations. They remain as a massive, permanent geological monument to the terrifying apocalyptic forces that completely, violently destroyed the old world and violently birthed the new. When we look deeply at the completely alien, terrifying landscape of the Earth 200 million years ago, we are absolutely not just looking at a dead, irrelevant past. We are intimately, directly witnessing the brutal, highly violent, and incredibly chaotic biological crucible that ultimately, undeniably forged the highly complex reality of our very own existence. Every single beat of our mammalian hearts, every single strand of insulating hair on our bodies is a direct, undeniable biological inheritance from the terrifying Early Jurassic period. We are the absolute, undeniable descendants of the tiny, heavily terrified survivors that aggressively navigated the dark, highly dangerous shadows while massive, earth-shaking giants proudly ruled the sun. The story of Pangea's violent, catastrophic death is incredibly, deeply woven into the very fabric of our highly complex DNA. A permanent, undeniable genetic memory of absolute survival. It is a profound, deeply humbling reminder that our beautiful, highly fragile modern world is nothing more than a temporary, deeply fleeting configuration in deep geological time. The Earth is a constantly shifting, violently dynamic, and aggressively evolving planetary engine, absolutely indifferent to the temporary, fleeting biological empires that rise and fall upon its crust. Yet, despite the terrifying apocalyptic geological forces that constantly threaten to completely eradicate everything, the brilliant, highly adaptable spark of life has never, ever been completely extinguished. It aggressively adapts, it violently evolves, and it brilliantly, perfectly finds a way to beautifully endure even the most devastating, world-ending catastrophes in planetary history. The age of dinosaurs was a spectacular, incredibly terrifying, and truly magnificent chapter in this deeply ancient, ongoing, and completely unfinished story of terrestrial and marine survival. But it was merely one highly dramatic scene in the grand, sweeping, and completely unfathomable multi-billion-year evolutionary saga of our magnificent, highly resilient blue planet. As we look back at the terrifying, highly alien world of Pangea, we must deeply respect the brutal, highly unforgiving biological journey that has safely brought us here. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible, highly terrifying, and deeply fascinating journey back to the apocalyptic, deeply alien world of the early Jurassic period. If you were completely fascinated by the terrifying, brutal evolutionary history of Pangea, the camp eruptions, and the aggressive rise of the dinosaurs, please engage with our channel. Don't forget to aggressively hit that like button. And absolutely, definitely subscribe to Survival Geography for much more incredible, deeply fascinating dives into Earth's most terrifying ancient past. We highly, actively encourage you to deeply share your profound thoughts, complex theories, and burning questions in the active comment section completely, directly below this specific video. Which incredibly terrifying, highly bizarre, early Jurassic creature absolutely fascinated you the most? The heavily armed Dilophosaurus, the towering Plateosaurus, or the massive deep-sea Temnodontosaurus? Would you have possibly, miraculously survived the apocalyptic, terrifying climatic extremes of the devastating Mega-Monsoon, or the highly toxic, deeply suffocating volcanic ash of the camp eruptions? Let us know your completely honest, highly detailed thoughts, and actively join our massive, deeply passionate community of prehistoric history, paleontology, and deep-time geological enthusiasts. Your incredible, highly valued support completely allows us to continue producing these highly detailed, incredibly expensive, and deeply researched cinematic documentary experiences for you to completely enjoy. Please be sure to highly actively click the notification bell so you never, ever miss a single, highly anticipated, completely newly released episode of Survival Geography documentaries. In our very next, highly anticipated episode, we will aggressively travel even further forward in deep geological time to witness the absolute undeniable peak of the dinosaur empire. We will aggressively explore the incredibly lush, highly dangerous, and deeply terrifying prehistoric jungles of the massive, highly active late Cretaceous period. Prepare yourself to physically, intimately meet the absolute largest, most terrifying, and completely lethal terrestrial apex predators that have ever violently walked the surface of our planet. Until then, stay incredibly curious, deeply fascinated, and always completely respect the terrifying, absolute, and completely undeniable power of the Earth's deeply ancient, highly violent history. This is Survival Geography, your ultimate, highly trusted cinematic guide to the most dangerous, terrifying, and deeply fascinating eras in the entire history of life on Earth. Thank you incredibly much for watching, and we will definitely, absolutely see you in the very next, highly thrilling and deeply educational deep time documentary adventure. For more incredible, highly detailed, and completely immersive prehistoric documentary content, please heavily explore the massive, deeply curated playlists actively available on our channel page right now. We have absolutely hundreds of hours of highly educational, deeply terrifying, and completely fascinating content covering every single major era of the Earth's highly complex geological history. From the bizarre, highly alien creatures of the ancient Cambrian explosion to the massive, heavily furred mammalian giants of the freezing, brutal Pleistocene Ice Age. Survival Geography is completely, absolutely dedicated to bringing the deeply ancient, highly terrifying past back to vibrant, incredibly realistic, and highly cinematic life for our amazing viewers. Follow us actively on all major social media platforms for incredible, highly exclusive behind-the-scenes content, deeply fascinating paleontological updates, and much more exciting, highly educational material. We are constantly, aggressively working with leading paleontologists and highly respected geologists to ensure our deep-time documentaries are incredibly accurate, highly detailed, and completely up-to-date. Your incredible, highly passionate engagement actively, undeniably helps us completely demystify the deeply complex, highly terrifying science of paleontology and deep geological time for the entire world. Remember, the deeply terrifying, highly alien past is absolutely never truly dead. It is completely, undeniably alive within the incredibly complex biological DNA of the present. Every single time you actively step outside and closely observe a small, highly agile modern bird, you are intimately, directly looking at a highly evolved, living dinosaur. The legacy of Pangea, the terrifying camp eruptions, and the aggressive rise of the Jurassic giants completely, undeniably surrounds us in absolutely every single aspect of nature. Thank you once again for actively, deeply supporting our highly educational, incredibly cinematic documentary channel and our massive, deeply passionate, and highly engaged prehistoric community. Stay incredibly safe, stay deeply curious, and absolutely never, ever stop aggressively exploring the incredible, highly terrifying, and deeply fascinating mysteries of our magnificent blue planet. We will absolutely, definitely see you in the very next, highly thrilling, completely immersive, and deeply educational Survival Geography, prehistoric deep time documentary video. Goodbye for now, and completely, absolutely enjoy the rest of your incredibly beautiful, highly peaceful, and deeply safe modern mammalian day on planet Earth. End of transmission. Survival Geography, signing off from the deeply terrifying, highly alien, and completely unforgettable early Jurassic period of the Mesozoic era.